if resilience testing and exploit validation started being budgeted the same way that observability or CI infrastructure is, then I think that would also be meaningful. So, I think revenue and customer growth matter, of course. Like, category change is really just about people thinking differently. And it's when that new behavior starts to feel obvious in hindsight, is when you've changed something there, right? So that's what we hope to do. We want to democratize cybersecurity in a sense, in a way where it's accessible and affordable to everyone.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today we're thrilled to have Derek Foster on the mic. He's the co-founder and CTO of Best Defense, an AI-driven cybersecurity platform building what they call continuous security and resilience testing, kind of a mouthful. Derek has spent more than a decade working in SRE, pen testing, large-scale infra security across fintech and enterprise platforms. And today he's helping build technology that automatically detects vulnerabilities and even ships fixes directly into developer workflows. We're excited to talk to him about his journey, the future of cybersecurity, and what he's building. Thanks for coming on, Derek.
Hey, no problem. I'm happy to be here. Just to talk shop.
Yeah, fair disclosure, Best Defense is a portfolio company, so we're going to be nice. I'd love to get your origin story. What's your background?
It really just started off with a lot of curiosity in the beginning more than anything else early on. So when I was young, I was kind of always drawn to systems, like not just using them, but understanding why they behave the way that they do. And funny enough, it actually originated from the gaming space. I play a lot of games with friends, and I was kind of the one that was more particularly interested in the how that they were building it than playing the game itself. So I tinkered a lot with it. One of my favorite things that I picked up, and I guess that would be related to cybersecurity in a way, was something called a GameShark. And I may be dating myself a little bit here, but it was this nifty little in-between that you could put in on this device, and it would basically overwrite things during execution time.
You put
like
a little
overwrite
code
memory
in there and it'd give you like infinite life on a game or something.
Yeah, exactly
I
that.
totally recall this. Yeah, so like a regular Super Nintendo kind of attachment on the cartridge.
Yes, absolutely. And then that's just kind of got me fascinated as to like, how is that actually working, behind the scenes? Like, I'm just plugging this thing in between and it's doing something magical. I kind of picked that part and learned a little bit more about the memory management and how things happen on the board and the transfer of data, right? So, so early on that garnered a pretty good interest in computers in general, and then it became networks and then software and then eventually security and infra at scale. Thankfully, I've been blessed to have some good experience like that. So over time, I realized that I was really attracted to that intersection of complexity and consequence, from the gaming days. So I just liked the situations where the tech details really mattered more than anything.
It's back when video games were actually hard too. Like you needed a GameShark in some cases. Like, I don't know, I remember like Ninja Gaiden. Like it was almost like impossible like to beat Ninja Gaiden, which I did a Christmas or two ago. I sat there on the couch with the Nintendo Switch and beat Ninja Gaiden. But it had the reverse thing where you could like press the two button, the rockers and go back, if you messed up. And it still took me like 4 hours to beat the game. And that was like with like redos.
Yeah, it was kind of,
you didn't have a redo. Like you just
no,
you just had to start over.
Yeah, they have it really good these days with that. We built a certain amount of grit and resiliency with the games that came out early on, especially Super Mario and stuff like that. I mean,
yeah,
go back to entirely. They still keep some of those philosophies in the Dark Souls games these days.
Right.
Yeah, where you have to start over quite considerably if you fail, but nowhere near as rough as it was before.
My main game is Escape from Tarkov, which I still play a few times a week now. And that game is very unforgiving on dying. Like you lose all your gear and it takes a while to kind of earn it back.
It reminds me of the RuneScape days.
Yeah.
Playing that, you'd go into the wild, and if you get lured out by higher levels on the promise of good gear, and then they would just jump you in the woods and you lose all your stuff.
Do you recall your favorite GameShark hack?
My favorite GameShark hack? this is going to sound silly, but I mean, I just loved having the infinite lives period in anything that I was doing because it gave me the chance to really just try to break the games over and over again in many different ways without, consequence. So
Yeah.
I guess I would say unashamedly, I chose God mode most of the time.
So, gaming kind of one thing led to another, and you ended up in cybersecurity. Do you remember what the first technical challenge was in cybersecurity that really grabbed you?
I don't think that it was like any specific challenge. Like it was mostly puzzles. I just like to solve puzzles. So really, like it wasn't just solving a technical problem per se. It was just seeing how certain weaknesses could become an operational or business weakness very quickly. And when I got out of college to start doing this type of work, that's when it became much more compelling to me because of that reason. So it wasn't just a specialty in IT, right? It's a place where it was one of the clearest places where engineering kind of meets business reality, right? So you get to both sides of the coin, right? So a lot of people picture the cybersec space as this kind of abstract cat and mouse type game. But what hooked me was just how tangible it actually is. So, like a bad assumption about permissions, some overlooked depth, or some weak validation paths, some blind spots and observability, like those just don't stay small for super long.
Mm.
So those turn into bad stuff, outages, incidents, and really expensive cleanups. So that's really just what I loved about the field in general. Like you get to combine technical depth with high stakes reasoning at the end of the day. So you're not just saying, "Can I do this?" You're asking, "What does it mean if this fails?" and how to design the systems that are resilient under this type of stress, right? So I think the first problem I ever solved in security was literally just as simple as like secure API connections through like leveraging tokens and stuff where the token itself was exposed through one of the repos that we had. And we just didn't know the proper way to obfuscate and transfer this type of information around without causing any proper issues. And I mean, this was way, way early on. It's probably my first job when I was writing just straight up raw PHP code in files with really no framework or anything like that behind it. So yeah,
So when did the idea for Best Defense first come together?
so I spent a lot of time in a multitude of different domains. So fintech, e-commerce, multifamily housing, marketing, and such. Not only just doing general app dev, but network administration and security because of compliances and controls that were necessary, right? We worked a lot as developers and with developers to push out code at light speed. I mean, the business needs were real. They wanted new features all the time. There was no excuse. If you said it could be done in 2 months, they wanted it in 3 weeks. So there was a lot of push on developers to velocity and just to be able to get stuff out, right? But the problem was that when you're met with that reality, you tend to circumvent a lot of the normal practices that you might put into place to have a consideration for security. You don't really think about what type of data you're piping through this endpoint, where is it ending up visually at the different result pages that you may have. You're not really sure of what compliance control you may be, going against by choosing certain tech. Perhaps you didn't check a vendor that you're using, a new package that you brought in for any issues that they might have recently, all in the name of just getting things done faster, right? So we just kept getting caught up in this situation where annually, traditionally, the pen tests were annually, and we would go through this bum rush process where the audits were coming up and we would buy these temporary tools to kind of throw a bunch of alerts at us, which always ended up being thousands of alerts at the end of the day. And you really had to sift through and figure out what was priority, what mattered, what was taken care of by compensating controls and things of that nature, right? So that you can have some kind of actionable list of things that are actual issues that could have an actual impact, and then you had to bum rush to fix those things before the others had a chance to say fail. So what we really wanted to do, and before we got to the idea of best defense, there we had worked with AI already. My co-founder, Dan, and we had built systems that would leverage high amounts and volumes of data, ingest that information, make decisions based off of a deep amount of rule sets to make decisions on documents to create resolutions that the agents needed at the time based on that information. And this was before AI was sexy by any means necessary, so it was really hard to do at the time. But with everything that's happened more recently, AI becoming a little bit more accessible, much better, higher context windows and things like that, it
What
kind of
more
got
software than ever is being generated, right? Because of
absolutely.
things like Claude Code and Codex and Cursor, like you're shipping more features than ever, right? Business like has a never ending hedonic treadmill of feature requests, and that, given you can ship, I've heard estimates of at least double, if not 10x faster. I think you're going to have a lot more security vulnerabilities now, right? Than you had, 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, because not only did just the needs of the business have these developers inadvertently circumventing those types of checks and balances, but now you just have folks who just have no clue, period, on how to approach security or how to understand it or what's really necessary for what it is that they're doing contextually. I mean, it's just generating at light speed. And traditionally, the security tools and processes have just lagged behind in that same velocity, right? It's becoming table stakes now to bring that security up to the velocity of development, and that's what we're trying to do here, right? So it kind of came together when Dan and I's repeated experience turned into this kind of shared thesis. We spent enough time around those situations, those systems, those real operations and real security issues to kind of see that gap from a couple different angles. And since they were being asked to move faster, automate more, adopt AI, but also reduce exposure and maintain trust, the tooling around just still felt it was just too periodic and just really noisy. So the more we looked at it, it wasn't like a missing feature issue per se. It was just a categorical issue.
Yeah.
Like security testing, exploit validation, resilience validation, and remediation workflows, all the stuff that we focus on at Best Defense, they were just too disconnected from each other. And tool sprawl, so many tools involved compared to how engineering teams actually operate. So it started to feel a little bit inevitable that we should create a platform that kind of married all those ideas together and made it easy to use, not only for people who just didn't have huge tech backgrounds, but also configurable and targetable enough for real red team operators to use, like a sniper instead of a shotgun per se.
Yeah. So who's typically your customer?
So we find that a lot of reasons that people come to us is really just for high compliance reasons. So we end up speaking with development teams in general, red team operators who are looking to kind of give themselves superpowers and amplify their capabilities. But really, it's really just about the people who are using the product at the end of the day, not necessarily C-suite. Of course, we cater to them in a way where we create nice dashboards that give them the metrics and the trend analysis of what we find and what was fixed over time, how it maps to their compliances and all that. But being engineers ourselves, we care mostly about making it very seamless and easy to use for the operators at the end of the day. So that's who we tend to target the most.
Yeah. So I get the problem. Like, what was your unique take when you looked at the market and you're like, okay, this should exist and it doesn't? Like, what was it about what you were building where you just had to like see it through and build it?
Well, there was a time when companies would think about security in intervals. So you'd run a pen test, produce a report, fix
A pen
some
test
issue.
is a penetration test for anybody listening who doesn't know what security is. So you're basically
Right.
you're hitting endpoints and you're trying to like get into the system, who do certain like API injections and just trying to like try to fool the system into giving you access.
Well said, Brian.
It
So
barely was.
no, it was good. It was good. So, you're fixing these issues and trying to satisfy some compliance requirements and then move on. But that model largely assumes that your environment stays sufficiently stable between those annual, quarterly checkpoints. And as we know now, lot of modern environments just absolutely do not.
Yeah, you're doing continuous integration, CI/CD kind of pipelines where you're deploying every day or two or week. So technically, you should be doing pen testing every time you have a pull request, more or less, which is a developer has a piece of code and I want to integrate it into the code base and ship it. You should be able to run it both pre-integration and post.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, code's just shipping so fast. Infra changes even faster. Dependencies on top of that. But, and AI just around all of it accelerating it. So it's not, the question just really becomes like, how much confidence should you really have in a point in time assessment versus like a continuously changing system, right? So you hit the nail on the head. That's why continuous monitoring and validation matters so much now. They had a report that came out that explicitly framed that monitoring and testing around continuous monitoring and periodic penetration testing and vuln assessments, depending on the monitoring maturity in place. So
This is the New York Department of Financial Services.
that's the one.
Okay, yeah,
I always have to look this stuff
I
up. It
googled it.
drives me nuts.
Yeah,
So that is that's a pretty good reflection of where like really things have gone. When we say the model currently is broken, really just mean, I guess I would say I really just mean it's too static for the dynamic environment.
right. Because it's not just about detecting vulnerabilities. What your platform does is it delivers the fixes directly into developer workflows. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what's the technical breakthrough that made that possible.
Yeah, so I mean, it was just a lot of different things that kind of coalesced, right? There was I think the biggest one being the trust factor when it comes to AI and how it's trusted in your workflows and what you allow it to do. We're seeing a lot of that wall break down a bit more. It's still a bit of a divide, out there, but when we're talking about adoption of AI into the development workflow, that seems to be where it has taken storm more than any place else as it is, right? So it's kind of changing the narrative there that, AI and programming can be a viable option. I think now with still more human in the loop involved, but it's really helping amplify the skills of people who are out there, right? So people are becoming more natural with that in their flow, leveraging it for planning, checking against their work, looking for issues, doing refactors and stuff like that. So adding in something like that in the security space just became much more viable because people are now just understand how it can fit into their workflow on the day-to-day basis. And with them becoming much more accurate these days than before, with the benchmarks that you've seen from like Anthropic and stuff, it's becoming a little bit easier of a bite to chew. I don't think they're fully ready for it, right? But we're definitely on our way, and we're seeing that with some of our customers. So I would say secondarily to that, it's not just the AI tools in place that are causing this kind of shift in the market, but we're seeing the narrative change from big names in the field like Chase and JP Morgan and uh, even Google and stuff have been coming out with some keynotes and memos that they send out about how important it is for security to be more of a continuous function in your development environments than it is periodic, because of the rate of adoption from not only developers who are building stuff, but also from the attackers who are trying to get into your systems. They're not waiting for anybody. They're already bought on. They're on board. There's been a few breaches even recently stemming from other countries that have leveraged AI in a way where it was more or less unmanaged. Just a few clicks for them to orchestrate attacks across dozens of different companies to exfil data at light speed. And unless you have the same kind of momentum and velocity in your defense work as the attackers do, you're always going to be behind. So it just makes sense now to have this AI defense versus AI offense, right? But I think there's still something about the operators that need to be in place so that we can leverage their creativity and their skills and their experience to leverage it more as a directed system than anything else. And so bringing this all, that's the one side of the coin, right? The secondary side of the coin is the fixing it. So the fixing it's always been an issue. As I mentioned before, you get inundated with all these alerts from these systems that find it, but then you have to go through the triage of verification and then fixing the issue and making sure that it actually works, so through regression testing and things like that, right? So leveraging on that side of the coin to be able to create a system that not only is accurate enough to make a thin slice change to solve the problem, but also gives a human in the loop for verification, for review. It makes it an easy addition to the team, because we've seen with our benchmarks about 85% reduction in mean time to resolution, just because after our system takes care of all the finding it part, it has all the context and information and awareness to tell you why it's exploitable and the way that it was exploited and the reason why you should fix it in this way. And that makes it easy for the dev to sign off and say, okay, that looks like a great fix. Let's click it through. And the red team operators, I'll say from my recent ICP interviews, have been primarily excited about the fixing it part, because there's just so much they have to
Yeah, they
do
can
from.
detect a lot of issues, right? And like a bunch of exploitation surface area, but now they got to go fix it, right? And I think that's an important distinction is it's not just detecting the exploit like points, but also generating the fixes. Maybe you talk about like how hard that was technically to build that kind of system.
So when you think about code fixing, a lot of people will, consider something like Anthropic, and it will fix your code. And I mean, it's a powerful, powerful AI, and it can fix issues when it finds them. But there's a few things around that were necessary for this to be adoptable in a scalable sense, and for organizations that are high compliance, right? It's really not about can the AI generate text for the security fix. The unlock was just the bridge between that gap and between the detection and action, right? So this part of the system that was super difficult was.
And then verification. So it's not just the detection and the patching, but then it's like designing the regression tests to now, okay, now that we've merged this patch, does it solve the problem that we detected? And going forward, every time we push more code into production, we can now run those same tests again.
Yeah, you touched on a very key point, and that's the exploit validation, right? A lot of the existing tools, they just tell you that something might be a problem, but to have it provably exploited is the key, from that. And in that provable exploitation gives you the information and the context to create a highly targeted and effective fix for the issue.
Yeah. It's almost like a red team copilot tool in a way. I mean, I know copilot is kind of a dirty word now in software, but it is sort of like that. It's a Claude code for red teaming.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to put it. I'm gonna steal that one. I'm gonna write that down
Claude
somewhere.
code for red
But
teaming.
I'll write that down somewhere because it is, and it needs to be focused on those specific issues, and to leverage the same tools that they use on a day-to-day basis in the way that they would use them, because they just spend an enormous amount of time doing the reconnaissance on the targets that they're given, to do the enumeration, to find out where those holes are, and the scanning of the vulnerabilities to build that attack surface. That there's so much to that part of the job that takes so much time, that by the time they get through that and run through all the tests and find things, the devs have already pushed out a ton of stuff. The attackers may have already found those things that needed to be patched before then. So that needed to be sped up to meet today's demand and velocity. And it was especially timely now because AI related risk is just a huge governance problem, not just a product problem per se. If you read up on IBM's like 2025 cost of data breach research, ungoverned AI systems are just way more likely to be breached and costly when they are. And that average right now is sitting at like 4.4 million per breach. So it's not just creating opportunities for defenders, it's also raising the cost of weak oversight, that late periodic checks that are there, right? So at the end of the day, it's powerful to consider having this in your workflow, especially for the remediation. But yeah, that's what I would say at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a huge market. Obviously, I think the timing is excellent. AI is creating new gaps that can be exploited. The spending is huge. We're seeing huge exits in this area with like Google acquiring Wiz for like $20 billion. Good for them. What shifts are you seeing on the ground that most investors and founders are underestimating?
Apologies, just thinking. So dramatic pause, right? I think just the first underestimation here is just really it's the shift of speed. The attackers are just getting insanely fast, like not just more sophisticated, just super fast. I mean, AI itself is just lowering their costs fundamentally on research and contextual generation and like social engineering support. That was what we saw most of what AI was being used by the threat actors first, when that stuff came out, was just making their emails sound better when they came through. So you might actually believe that it's a prince that needs money. Not only that, but also the coding assistance lowers the barrier of entry for people who are interested in becoming hackers and exploiting businesses like that, right? So the time window between exposure and exploitation matters just way more than ever. And I would say secondarily, the supply chain and third party risks that are involved, right? So everybody says they care about it, but a lot of organizations just operationalize it weekly. In Verizon's report last year, mentioned breaches through third parties doubled like 30%. And even OWASP in their top 10, they elevated the software supply chain failures to a top tier risk category
So maybe you
at
can
that.
unpack what you just said. What is that acronym for people listening? A WASP.
OWASP?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, of course. I apologize for that. I know these acronyms can just get
Well,
a little
especially
crazy.
especially in cybersecurity, there's lots of acronyms, shorthands.
Yeah, yeah, I know, and that makes a lot of sense. So that's basically the, if I don't mess this up, Open Worldwide Application Security Project is what that is. So
Okay.
they're kind of a nonprofit. They dedicate mainly to just improving security through like free and open source tools at this point. So
So we back a lot of founders, right? And that are building startups. What security mistakes do you see over and over again?
if I were to boil it down to similar patterns that show up, so when it comes to founders, they have a lot of good intentions, right? They want to ship fast and get cool features out to their customers as they're trying to find their product market fits and just cater to those who are on there currently so that they don't experience crazy churn to start out, right? So, but the problem with that is that the discipline of security becomes a bit more postponed. So, like a lot of founders will often assume that they can just clean up identity boundaries or access control stuff or clean up their dependencies, add logging in the right places, right? And do all their exposure management stuff later. And sometimes they can, but until they can't, then it's super dangerous because they don't. The thing people don't understand is that attackers don't really need your most exotic weakness to exploit per se. They just need whatever's available to build the map and to be able to move laterally within systems to do something with it, right? So the pattern data that we keep seeing reinforces that it's mainly credential abuse, vulnerability exploitation, and operational weaknesses at that remain some major breach paths, right? So my advice is really just don't act like, try not to act like a giant enterprise on day one per se, but just build your good habits early. Know what you have, know what data you're managing, know what's exposed, know who has the access to that, and make sure you take the time to validate it. Because if you just take those steps, just keep that proper hygiene, then you can prepare yourself for most things and be able to see the writing on the wall for where your weak points really are. And that's where you can focus your limited bandwidth of security testing on, or on those layers, those holes that you have. So
Yeah. So you're
that's
you're
that's what I would
CTO,
say.
right? For Best Defense.
Yeah,
What has been the hardest engineering decision you've had to make since founding the company?
that's a good question. The hardest engineering decision. This might be the one. So, and it's not even specifically to the engineering. It's really just the hardest recurring decisions is where to draw the line between the autonomy and the control. Okay, because it's really easy to think autonomy is great. I mean, because autonomy is exciting, right? People love the idea of AI just taking over the hard parts of everything. But what we found is that really our customers really need scope control and governance and evidence and auditability and the ability to just understand what the system did and why it did it. So the harder engineering decisions often come down to really like, where should the system act automatically? Where should it recommend? Where should it automatically fix something? Where should it wait for some kind of a human and rights, right? So that's not just a product design question per se. That's like a trust design question is the way
Yeah,
I
it's
would
kind of a
frame that.
product philosophy question, right?
Yeah, yeah, because in
As you're kind of,
security, it just
yeah,
matters a lot, the trust. So, because they're not just buying capability at the end of the day, they're buying like confidence in how capability is constrained, I guess I would say. So,
yeah.
because with security, just so much can go wrong.
And you guys are closed source, right?
At this moment, yeah.
Yeah. What was that decision like? Because you probably looked at it, you probably considered open source. So there's some security companies that kind of start with that kind of open source framework and then build you know, a, a SaaS offering on top of it open source. What was it? You're just like, did you guys consider open source when you guys launched?
Yeah, we certainly did. We certainly did, and I think that that's not even out of the cards right now. We're actually putting together one of our first open source contributions, which is going to kind of be a light version of the red teaming side of things, and perhaps even with remediation coupled with it, right? A light version of that to help out the community. But I would say the core reason why we didn't start off with that was simply because we were building these tools for our own internal use at the time for our own needs, and really didn't expand out into the space until we realized that other people might actually need it, right? And by that point, we had already been working with like other red teamers and stuff on design and figuring out how it can work at scale operationally, and like there's pieces of this that will become open source, and I probably already have, even from other people. But there's a real need for the system that lives around that, and that's when you start getting into the enterprise level, the public sector level, with government and stuff. They can't particularly just lean on the open source side of things because they need a higher level of operationalization of governance and auditability that needs to surround these tools in order for them to be safe to use. So that's why that's one of the reasons why we chose to do that initially, because we want to figure it out as we're going along here with our customers and as we grow, and then once we understand what would be the safest to output for the general public so that they can do the same kind of things that we do to some degree, then that's going to be when we do that.
So if you look out, 5 or 10 years and you guys are a great success and everybody's using Best Defense, what did you guys build and why you're proud of it?
That's a good question. You making me think. In 5-10 years, I think that probably a few different things. So for me, like the deepest, like really what we want to achieve fundamentally as a company and in a general sense is just to get as autonomous as we can with security layers to be able to fight that ongoing threat, where red teamers are largely just operational orchestrators that can leverage their skills and understanding to be able to point this in the way that it needs to be pointed in a safe way that is auditable, that is governable, but also to educate new people in the space cleanly on how these things should be done ethically and how to understand systems and how they operate like this, right? So they can not only leverage the tools that are out there, but build on top of them, from their core, right? So that's really where we want to be. And the deepest milestone for me would be like a shift in expectation for getting to that point, right? Because people are still hesitant on a lot of that autonomy, right? So helping people visibly see out in the public and out in the open, like you can use these things in a safe way. You can protect yourself from, because the hackers aren't slowing down with this stuff. They're just keeping on going, right? You need to learn how to use this stuff. So how can we do that in a way that's easy to digest and scalable so that we can create a smaller attack surface for the United States and abroad for these vibe coders that have come out creating solutions at the speed of light. That's where we want to be, I think, in 10 years, is just full autonomy with the capability for directed control where it matters. I think respectively a deep educational aspect to that process so that the knowledge isn't lost
Yeah.
over the years, because you're going to need the novelty of human creativity in the process to be able to improve on these types of systems as it goes along. And I think that's something that's largely been ignored in a lot of these tools that get out there is, how do we make sure that they don't lose this skill set and knowledge down the line? How can we amplify their skill set by leveraging AI? But how can we facilitate an environment in which new people can come in and learn about how the core works, and also even teach some of the experienced people something new?
Yeah.
With the interesting patterns that can be found through AI, right? So I know that was a bit long-winded, but that's where my mind has been going with it lately. And things could change.
So how would you explain to somebody what a red team is versus like a white team?
A red team versus a white team. That's a good question to have. Like, red team is just the attackers. Okay, so you could consider them like white hat hackers, right? At the end of the day, where they come in and they're acting like any attacker would from any other nation state that might be trying to get at information. And if I understand what you mean by white hat, that's why I got a little confused, I think, because that's who I view like as the red team,
The
right?
internal defense team trying to stop the hackers. The
Yeah,
white hat.
exactly right. So they're kind of like, I mean, even at that point, I think it's a little different, because you have, so the red team focuses mainly on ethical hacking, right? So that's where the confusion comes in, right? So they try to attempt to breach your defenses and do a lot of exploits of issues that you have and gain unauthorized access. But their focus is mainly just like offensive, stealthy stuff. They use a lot of phishing, social engineering, and malware simulations, things like that. But when you say white team, that's more of like the governing body of the cybersecurity exercise itself. So they oversee and coordinate the safety of the assessment being done. So they're like a bridge between. So when you're saying defenders, what that is actually, those are the blue team. That's what you would refer to those as.
Oh, the
So
blue team. Okay. Yeah, I got it confused. So the blue team is because white hat is kind of the red team. They're the friendly hackers, and then the blue team
yeah,
is the defenders. So they're the ones internally trying to defend against the red team.
yeah, not that white hat isn't a thing. So like that is a thing. It's
Yeah,
just
that's the
it's
whole
at a
thing. Yeah,
different.
yeah.
They're just kind of like they're like a referee between red team, blue team at
Got
this
you.
point, right? So that's where really it is at that point. So that's the key differences between the two. You have your red teams who attack and your blue teams that try to defend. And our coin our system basically is red and blue at the same time.
Yeah. How do you think cybersecurity will look different in the future? Call it 5 or 10 years out.
But I think in a general sense, I mean we're just going to continue to see these types of automated systems being put into place where attackers are building systems that are not only at the click of a button attempt to hack a system, but fully operationalized and standardized in a way where they can just package these things up and hand them off to anybody who really wants them out there, right? And so with that level of execution and funding, I mean, these guys have so much money behind them as it is that it's almost going to be a day-to-day basis in which security is going to need to be. You're always attacking your systems before they can attack them and shifting the security way more left than what it is now, because a lot of the red teaming will be done against either digital twins of your production or against production directly, because that's where you want to make sure that your security is the tightest when you have things out into the world, right? But being able to shift that way more left to the point of where you're in the developer's hands, you have these automated tools, these agents in place to be
What
able
does
to work
shifting
with.
left mean? What is?
That's a good question as well. So shifting left is basically just moving the process further down the line into the development's hand at the end of the day. When it comes, and
Gotcha.
this is just from a purely software perspective, but when the developer's writing code, or the guy in DevOps is constructing his VPC and setting up the subnets and setting up roles for access and data flows and stuff like that, right? So this is just where things are being built. I think things are going to increasingly shift more to that layer where you have something alongside those engineers, much like you have with your coding assistants today, but from a direct security standpoint, where as they're typing and fixing things out, there's something that runs and validates everything for you on a localized digital twin that can run through safely all of these different exploits that could be potentially in your code, right? So that you can fix it before it even makes it out to production. And so that's the key, right? Continuous, as far left as we can, so we can reduce exposure as much as we can before things make it out to production. So I guess that would be in a nutshell. I think that's where things are going. Just more autonomous, deeper down into the development's hands, where it's more automated, and you're preventing the hacks from the attackers just by catching it
Oh yeah.
yourself
The
faster.
best platform makes it almost invisible, I would imagine.
It
It's just
needs to
like
be
we're just safe
seamless.
and secure, and I don't think about it.
See, that's the struggle. It needs to be
Yeah.
seamless, right? You can't
Yeah.
interrupt these guys and their workflows. I'm the same way. I've been a
Yeah.
long-term engineer. I don't want something where I have to always open up something else if I can avoid it, right?
Yeah. Open up your Jevons regression testing, unit testing thing, run it. Okay, now it's running, and I need to go like grab coffee and wait for it to run. And
Yes, because it's
yeah.
this thing called context switching that devs absolutely hate, which is the minute your focus is broken out of what it is you're building, it takes you a half hour, an hour to get back into it to
Yeah.
continue going, right? So
Yeah,
it,
like
it
where was
needs
I? I
to
got
get
to
to
put
that
all this
point.
stuff in my working memory again that I was working on. And what milestones or metrics would tell you that best defense has really changed the industry?
If buyers stop accepting just raw alert volume as value, and auditors as well, and just start expecting validated findings more than anything, I think that would be meaningful. If going back to what I was just saying, if the devs start expecting security or remediation to show up in their normal workflows instead of these disconnected reports, I think that would also, be meaningful to help push people towards that narrative, right? So if resilience testing and exploit validation started being budgeted the same way that observability or CI infrastructure is, then I think that would also be meaningful. So, I think revenue and customer growth matter, of course. Like category change is really just about people thinking differently. And it's when that new behavior starts to feel obvious in hindsight is when you've changed something there, right? So that's what we hope to do. We want to democratize cybersecurity in a sense, in a way where it's accessible and affordable to
But also
everyone.
seamless and kind of disappears into the workflow.
Yeah, exactly. Seamless and affordable and accessible. Yeah, that's what we want.
Yeah, so let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions. What cybersecurity trend are most people ignoring today that you think will matter a lot in the next few years?
Governance debt,
Tell us what you
mostly.
mean by that.
So a lot of companies are really excited about deploying AI, of course, but they're much weaker. The systems are much weaker on access control and data boundaries and validation and policy than most people tend to realize.
Yeah. That sounds like something that most people are just like, just give it to my DevOps guy. I don't want to worry about that stuff.
That is so true and so painful at the same time, but
Yeah.
it's so necessary because the data
I'll give it to my
shows
solution architect. I don't want to think about it. Yeah.
because the data shows that the orgs that have the poor AI governance are more exposed and pay more when breaches happen.
Right.
And that debt just compounds if you ignore it.
How do you guys interact with SOC 2 compliance? And maybe you could explain what SOC 2 compliance is and does it interact with what Best Defense does?
Because in the way that we work with SOC 2 compliance tools is that we have coverage over the issues that we find in your systems, and then we directly map those to compliance controls. Okay, so how does that relate to SOC 2 and what is SOC 2? So SOC 2 is like a voluntary standard for service providers that store client data in places like the cloud.
Yeah.
It
Fintech
focuses.
companies, anytime you have like private data, lots of banks and institutions and other big enterprises will say, hey, I want to make sure that data's secure.
Yes, yes, exactly. They have a lot of focus on the security of your application, the availability of it. So like your SLAs, your service level agreements for like uptime and stuff like that, the integrity of your processes, confidentiality, privacy, all of these things. There's the component to it that involves making sure your application's secure and your customer's data is secure, but also just your organization itself in terms of like how are your policies structured for breaches? How do you
Yeah. Do you encrypt
handle.
your hard drives on your laptops and things like that?
Yeah, yeah, even down to just as simple as like does your employee's computer have a time lock on it that makes sense, for
Yeah.
closing
Does it just
just
stay unlocked for 5 hours? That's probably
it,
not good.
yeah, yeah, to a multitude of different other things. So requiring that you have security training, in your business to make sure people are up to date with at least the OWASP top 10 at the time. So that's what the reason people get SOC 2, and it's a pretty standard one too. It's almost table stakes if you want to get an enterprise customer. If you want to do anything over SMB, you can get by mostly with luck if you don't have it in the beginning if you're mainly servicing SMB. But if that first enterprise customer that you get, or even mid market, is probably going to ask you, you got your SOC 2?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't, that's when they tend to come over to us.
If you could redesign the internet from scratch with today's knowledge, what would be the first security principle you would bake in?
Oh God, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to go with the highest rated things at this time, because it makes the most sense. I would probably say, by and large, just strong identity systems and like least privilege by default. Nobody gets access to anything until until I find out what it is you need access to, and then
Who you are, what you
I'll
need
give you that
access.
I'll
Yeah.
give you that one little nugget that you need, right? So too much of the internet still just trusts too easily
Hmm.
across too many layers. So that's what I would say.
What advice would you give founders building infrastructure or security startups right now?
And you're just hitting me with the good ones today. I would say build for the workflow. Okay, so not just for the category that you're building for, and maybe this is more relevant to us, but like a product can be technically correct and still fail if it lands badly in how the teams actually operate. Okay, so just be honest about what is the real moat and what is just good marketing language for what it is that you do, because at the end of the day, these people, they need to use these systems. Whatever you're giving to them, it should fit exactly in what they're already using, or replace what they're using in a better way, and just feel less painful in doing it, right? So you can build something great, but if people can't use it, or you don't tell people about it enough, then it just doesn't even.
So this week I've seen some news about Anthropic's Claude Code leaking, but I think they tried to say that was an April Fool's joke. Was it an April Fool's joke?
If you've seen that post, I haven't yet, but I definitely seen all the posts about the leaks
Yeah.
from that. But I definitely saw, like, I mean, that was probably like thousands of YouTube videos go out about just chastising them over it. But I'll have to hunt for that to see if it's an April Fool's joke
Yeah,
or
maybe they
not.
should have used you guys
Maybe
if there was an actual breach.
we would have caught that. Absolutely, we would have caught that. But
Speaking of breaches and failures, what security failure or breach taught the industry the biggest lesson?
I mean, really, just the issues where it happens, where it hurts the most. So, like, there was a supply chain failure, like from Solar Winds, and like that's what this one I remember a lot, because this is kind of what raised to the surface the Log4Shell vulnerability that taught the industry that the trust in dependencies is one of the most underappreciated risks in like modern software. Because you remember what I mentioned earlier, OWASP even moved that so high up on their list, so it's directly reflective of that reality. But that impact there in supply chain in general is I think what should raise people eyebrows and get them interested in cybersecurity, because the Solar Winds itself was just like a big player in the software sphere for a while. This happened back in like 2019, so there was like 18,000, 20,000, whatever it was, customers ended up installing some kind of an update through their software that had some malicious code in it. And they used that to steal their customer data and spy on other organizations that were using the same software. So basically, in these kinds of attacks, these attackers aren't like going after your company or like your network directly. So what they're doing is they're sitting inside of that third party supplier. They gain their access to the target's network that they're going for by sitting in that layer, right? So in this case, that third party supplier was SolarWinds.
So the SolarWinds, they tapped into SolarWinds system, assumed their identity, and through the kind of RBAC controls that SolarWinds was granted, was able to get access to lots of systems and data.
Yeah, because so they had this system called Orion, which was like this it was like a performance monitoring solution that tracks a lot of their customers, and it had privileged access.
Yeah, like basically root privilege access across all the databases and
Mostly like performance data, but
Hmm.
more specifically from logs generated by their customers' IT assets. And what's in the logs is a lot of juicy information for attackers about where
There's all the
data is
ingress
going
egress
through.
of all the stuff they're inputting and outputting into the system.
Yeah, sometimes devs will put things that shouldn't go into logs, and so it can be a very powerful attack surface to expose if you can get to it. So it made it really ideal for them to, when they gained access to it, because they were able just to get into everybody else's network as a result. So that spread really fast, and it caused a lot of trouble across those organizations that were using it, and really kind of highlighted a lot of the safeguards that needed to be put into place, and the emphasis on compliance at the time, even though it was pretty strong. And they jumped to action pretty quick on it to figure out the nature and how to mitigate it. It still showed us how easy it is for things to fall apart if you don't have something in place that's forcing you to make sure you're taking the best practices every step of the way. And people like to say everything's hackable at some point. It's just an amorphous moving system, and we have to be able to keep up with that. So it's not a matter of if you can get breached, it's really when, and how fast can you move to patch that issue. So that's where I think real skill shines. That is so that's why really prioritize helping people fix the things that they find at light speed so it doesn't become a SolarWinds situation.
Speaking of that, what's a misconception about pen testing that most companies get wrong?
I would say that it's just a checkbox. People just treat it as an annual checkbox. Right? Good pen testing isn't always just about the report that gets generated and stuff. It's really just about understanding real attack paths and how information can help attacks chain from one part of your system to another under certain conditions, and clarifying the business impact of those issues that are found, right? So the business language is something like people just think of like a text spreadsheet, maybe that shows you like the vulnerabilities you have, but that's not always the only part of it. You have to measure the business impact of those issues that are found just as well, because this can cost people real money and maybe their insurances won't cover it if they don't patch it in enough time, right? So there's that everybody has too. So I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. Where can folks find out more about Best Defense online?
You can come right to our website at bestdefense.io. It's all lowercase, all one word, and just come check out our pages and see what we got. Book a demo. We're more than happy to show you how we bust up your stuff, find the nasty parts, and help you fix it up at the speed of light.
Thanks for coming on, Derek. I'm glad there's companies like yours out there keeping us safer.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. It's been a pleasure. I've been excited for this conversation. So it's been a lot of fun being able to reminisce on this and really dive into the juicy parts.
Thanks so much.